how much output two countries produce at a given relative price. Okay, and we had two countries, home country labor abundant and the foreign country land abundant. Yeah? From the attribute box, we got this result that the country which is more labor abundant will produce relatively more labor intensive good. Cloth is labor intensive, yeah, and the foreign country which is more land intensive is going to produce more land intensive good, which is food. We know that for any given price of cloth, we are going to have home country producing relatively more cloth than food. So at this price, this is the amount of cloth and food produced by the home country. Then of course the foreign country is going to produce relatively less cloth and food. Okay, so the foreign country supply function would lie somewhere here. Okay, this is what the supply function would look like for the foreign country. Yeah, it would be on the left hand side of the supply function for the home country. And so now from here, how do we get to the world price? All right, so now we are also going to measure on this axis quantity of cloth produced by the home country and quantity of cloth produced by the foreign country, quantity of food by the home country, quantity of food by the foreign country. All right, guys, these are really the averages of these two goods, these two. So supply function is going to be in the middle of the two. Okay, now whether the supply function is closer to the foreign country or it is closer to the home country would depend on which country is larger or has a bigger demand. Okay, so for the time being, we are just going to ignore that. Yeah, if we know what the relative price of cloth is for the home country and the relative price of food country in the foreign country, not the food, did I say food country? Yeah. Okay, the world price is going to be in between the two. This is the autarky price for the home country, autarky price for the foreign country, and this is the world prices. So when the home country opens up to trade, the relative price of cloth increases. What about for the foreign country? Well, the foreign country, what happens to relative price of cloth? Well, it decreases. Okay. So for the home country, the relative price of cloth over relative price of food. And for the foreign country, let me write that down up here. Labor abundant country, the relative price of the labor intensive good, which is cloth, yeah, is lower. Yeah? The relative price of the labor intensive good is lower in the home country. Yeah. So looking at this, what are the patterns of trade? Well, since the cloth is cheaper in the home country and it is more expensive in the foreign country, home country is going to export cloth and import food. What about for the foreign country? Well, the foreign country, it exports food and it imports cloth. Yeah. Right. So this brings us to the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem. So a country will export that commodity which uses intensively its abundant factor and import that commodity which uses intensively its scarce factor. All right. Right. So that now, what are the results? Well, it's very obvious, but let's just bring that point home again. When the relative prices of cloth changes in the two countries, in the home countries it is increasing, as we saw earlier. In the foreign country it is decreasing. What does that mean? Well, finally, because of trade, in this model where we've assumed two goods, two factors of production, no transportation costs, and no trade restrictions, so there's free trade, there is going to be a convergence of relative prices. So finally, when these two countries are open to trade, the relative price of cloth or relative price of food in the two countries would be equal. Now, which makes sense. We started off with relative price of cloth and food being lower in the home country than in the foreign country. And when these two countries started trading with each other, right, the relative price of cloth in the home country started increasing and it started decreasing. And that keeps happening. The trade keeps taking place. The price changes keeps happening till it's increasing, till relative price of cloth in the two countries are equal. Okay. Yeah. So we started off with this, and there are changes in the prices, and that is being brought about. Why? Because of trade between the two countries. Okay. Heckscher-Ohlin model allowed for, it assumed everything is the same across the two countries except for resources. Yeah? One country is abundant in one resource and the other country is abundant in another resource. And that was the basis of trade. That led to differences in prices. And because there were differences in prices, that brought about trade between the two countries. And finally, there was a convergence of the goods prices. So as the relative price of cloth increases, we would be able to show that the wage by rental ratios are going to increase, and that is going to lead to increase in T by L ratios for the two sectors, right? And the increase in the T by L ratios for the two sectors is then finally going to T by L ratios increase, and increase in T by L ratios is finally going to imply that the real wages, which depends on marginal productivity of labor, is going to increase, and these real wages increase in terms of both the prices. So labor is better off. Okay. Income redistribution was not discussed in the case of Ricardian model, and why? Because there was only one factor of production. Yeah.